Welcome back to Firestone Forge. So, one of the things I want to do is today I want to see about making a dagger out of some bandsaw blades and a bit of cable. Stick around.
I apologize in advance for some of the video glitches. There were some corrupted files.
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tin snips and cut both these blades. Doesn't matter where. We've ended up with two sets, obviously, of the bandsaw blade. They're about the same size, about the same length. So, we'll start getting them forge welded up. Now to get it in the forge and warmed up, flux it, and then hammer it together.
In order to forge weld properly, you need to make sure that the area is thoroughly cleaned. Use a wire brush and borax for flux if you'd like. Depending on the type of forge and how you're doing it, you might not need flux, but most typically you will. Then you heat the piece up until it is a really cherry red hot. Again, clean it, flux it again. Then go back through and heat the piece up thoroughly till you see sparks jumping out of your forge if you're using a coal forge. And then I find using a smaller hammer helps because you're able to actually get the pieces melded together without blowing a lot of the material off. If you hit it too hard with too large of a hammer, you can end up displacing too much material.
That end is forge welded. You can see all the individual layers. So, let's keep moving on.
Here's a little trick for you. After your piece is thoroughly forge welded, or anytime you're going to draw something out, use the horn of the anvil. I didn't really realize about it until I was talking with a guy named Fiddlin' Red. He's a 30-year blacksmith, and he was telling me about it, showed me a quick thing on it, and I gotta tell you, you can draw stuff out and taper like nobody's business on the horn of the anvil. Now when you're going to do cable Damascus, you forge weld one end, and then you just kind of throw it in your vise and do a real nice tight twist on it. Don't twist so much to where you actually tear or break the threads, but because that has happened to me. But just get a nice tight twist on it, and then wire brush it off, flux it again, throw it back in your forge, and heat the crap out of it until it's weldable. After it was forge welded together, I just threw it over the horn and drew it out. Again, it works real quick, so try the horn. End up using a chisel to punch a hole real quick, and then use that to also drift the hole open a little bit so that way I could put the handle through. I realized also that this is not the best way of, attaching a handle, but it worked for the moment. I end up going back through with a file and cleaning up the edges very nicely on the handle so that way it wouldn't have any issues. And for the pommel, I end up taking another piece of cable, forge welding it, and squaring it up real nice. And what I'm doing here is I'm cutting it halfway through, and then folding it over on itself. I did 3 cuts in different directions so that way it would actually fold over onto itself into a nice square, or rectangle I should say, and it actually came out real good, and then I forge welded the whole piece together. Once everything was shaped, I end up putting it into the forge, the propane forge, just to heat it up so that way I could normalize the thing. I let it sit in there for about 10 minutes at a nice cherry red and let it normalize. That's very important. Without that, the blade could snap. After normalizing, I used a farrier's rasp to put the basic edge onto it. It's not a sharp edge. It was just enough there to be the basic profile of what I want. You end up doing your final edging later on after it's hardened and heat treated. Now this is hardening the blade. I'm going to quench it into some canola oil that I have. However, I want to make sure that the blade, the whole blade, is a nice red. As you can see, the tip was kind of dark because it was up against the kale wool. So what I'm doing is I'm actually using the tongs or the pliers to move it back and forth in the flame so that way the whole thing gets nice and heated evenly. Also, you want to make sure that you don't leave it at one angle too long or else it might warp. So once the blade was finished, I took the pommel and the crossguard and I used the sanding disc on the grinder to polish them up and get them, even and squared and pretty. I also tapped and dyed or threaded the end of the blade and the pommel so that way they would screw on together. The next part is burning the handle on. You just heat the metal up until it's nice and cherry, and then you take the block of wood or whatever you're using and kind of just force it on down. Now, I would like to note that obviously wear gloves when doing this, first. Secondly, if you have another way or a better way of doing this, I would possibly recommend that because it does get a little bit warm against the hand. It did burn me a little bit, but you just kind of got to grit your teeth and keep going. After burning the hole through, I just kind of put all the pieces together and tightened them up. And you see my technique, it's not rocket science, it's really easy to do. I just kept going until I reached a nice taper that fit the hand fairly well. I would also like to point out that I had already polished all of my pieces. The blade, the crossguard, and the pommel have all been worked and cleaned up with varying grades of sandpaper up to 2000 grit just to make everything nice and pretty. If you can, put a mirror finish on it. It always makes it look better. So I then took a Sharpie and drew a line around, spiraling downwards, but it ended up not working out right. And all I'm using is a jeweler's file to put a nice little groove into the wood. I believe it was some kind of cedar because it was really, really soft, but it worked very nice.
I know it's a little dark, sorry. I'll do this in a little bit better light as well, but so far this is what we've ended up with. Okay, now I still have a lot of work to do, but the idea is, this is a little off. I had marked it with marker, just kind of eyeballing it, and I wanted to put a wrap around here. Now, as you can see, the grooves themselves do not actually sit right where the marker line is. While going, I just kind of, like I said, kept eyeballing it and kept my hand at the same angle. Turns out, when going over with the file, that was the more proper angle. But otherwise than that, pommel sits on there fairly nice. Everything sits on there fairly nice. Right about there's the balance. So I still have a few more things to add to this, but it kind of puts you right about the fingers for control.
So I used some spray adhesive to put the piece of cloth on there, and a braided wire inlay was set into the groove.
Alright, so it is my understanding that in order to etch this thing, which I want to put my touch mark in it, and in order to do so, you can salt water etch it, or as it's called. I believe you use vinegar and salt. Now, I've never done this. I watched like 2 videos a while back, and I'm just going to kind of roll with it. It might be distilled water, not vinegar. I don't have a damn clue. I should have done a little bit of research, but I didn't. So, we're going to give this a go. So, let's see how it works. Then you take a knife, a sharp knife, obviously. If you got an X-Acto knife, go ahead and use that. I'm just going to use the knife off my Leatherman. And you cut out, from the tape, you cut out the design you want. So this is what I want for my touch mark. From the research that I've done, the first rune is Viking, should say fire, and the second one says stone. Because my last name is Firestone, and this is Firestone Forge, that's what I want for my touch mark. So, let's give it a go. Alright, so from what I understand you do, is you have a bowl, and you take your vinegar, and you dump a bunch in. However much you'd like, you know, whatever's comfortable, I guess. Doesn't take a lot. Then you take your salt, and you just kind of dump it in there. That might be too much, but what they were saying was, is just kind of mix it until it's fully diluted. Seems pretty diluted to me. Now, what you do then is you take a battery charger for, like, you know, a trickle charger off your car, dirt bike, whatever, and you turn it up to the high setting. You clamp the red side to the blade, okay, and then you take the black side and you use a Q-tip, and you get a bunch of the solution way up the Q-tip. Then you just kind of clip this one down low and start going. Now, just as a rule of thumb, I would avoid doing this A, indoors, and B, without any form of ventilation. Of course, when you're done, make sure that everything's unplugged, and then wipe the area off. Remove. pretty cool. Alright, so this is what I've ended up with. Some people have referred to it as a sai. It's not. Some people have referred to it as needle from Game of Thrones. It's obviously not. Anyway, this is based off a 17th century design of an Italian rapier style dagger. Now, I put 5 layers of cardboard together and I did a puncture test and it went right through like butter. So that's really cool. And I love the fact that the blade flexes. Now, I always keep a cork on the end of it because safety. But it's got my touch mark in it. If you can see that a little bit better. Okay, there we go. There we go. So that's my touch mark. I'm going to try and actually get like a hand stamp one done down the road, but for right now, this is what I got. So, first attempt trying it. First time making a dagger like this, and I had a lot of fun. I learned a few things, and I've got a lot of ideas for down the road, but experience is the best teacher. So this is getting donated to the Society for Creative Anachronisms. The group that I'm in up here has a event in November and on the 19th in Sandpoint, and I am donating this for the rapier champion. Whoever wins rapier fighting, if the day is well enough with the weather, whoever wins will win this. So I thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed. I've had a lot of fun and learned something, and I'll check you guys next time.